There are more than 10,000 workers in this orchard, hired for a total of £1 a week and as much as they can eat. Their labours are essential to the fruit grower. Without them, his crop would be very small. They're honey bees, and as they feed, they pollinate the flowers, starting a process which leads to the autumn's crop of apples. They're essential to the garden too, usually as casual visitors. But anyone who offers them a permanent home on his land can share in the bees' stores of honey, collected and concentrated by a process no machine can imitate. The art of keeping bees is 6,000 years old, but they're still very much wild animals. Their natural home is in a hollow tree, but any dry, dark space will do. Their social organisation is often quoted as a model of industry and cooperation, but it's dominated by unbreakable rules and annually overturned by civil war. The central event of the bees' year is the swarm, when thousands together set out in search of a new home. In the middle of the swarm is the queen, controlling the activities of her subjects. The reward for their obedience is the safety that lies in numbers and unity. On the face of the swarm, the bees are comparing notes on their surroundings before deciding where to go, in an elegant dance language of their own. But these bees aren't going to have a choice. In veil and gauntlets, the beekeeper will take them to a home of his choosing. A few stings are the price he pays for the swarm. After being dumped rather unceremoniously on the threshold, the bees move in an orderly manner. It's not true that they're angry when they're swarming. Before setting out, they all filled up with honey as stores for the journey, and as a result they fly slowly and behave rather placidly, and they're particularly unwilling to sting. Once they have accepted the hive as their home, the bees settle down to work straight away. The first job is to build a comb, a delicate and perfectly symmetrical structure made of wax. A worker bee produces wax from glands in its abdomen, then chews it and molds it with its jaws to make the walls of the cells. The first wall's always a bit too thick. It's fined down later on until it's just strong enough to support itself and its neighbours. The builders are fed by incoming bees who've been collecting nectar to make honey. They spend some time visiting and grooming the queen, by far the largest bee in the hive. The queen's job in the hive is quite clear. She lays eggs, over 1,000 daily at the height of the spring season. That's her own weight in eggs every day. The workers have to feed and groom her. She's no time for that sort of thing herself. As soon as she finds an empty cell, she lays an egg in it. But even while she's laying, she gives audiences to her workers. They wear her scent on their feelers like a badge, and this is how they recognize each other. Soon, a whole bank of cells is supplied with eggs, and the nurse bees begin to care for their brood. The central cells, the brood comb, contain fertilized eggs which will hatch into sterile females, the workers of the hive. Hatching takes 3 days. Unfertilized eggs in cells at the edge of the comb hatch into drones, idle male bees. The nurse bees check the cells continually, and as soon as the eggs hatch, they begin shoveling the food in. At first, the grubs are given a juicy secretion called bee milk, but soon they're eating honey mixed with raw pollen brought to them by the tireless nurses. The nurse bees stay inside the hive. The food they deliver has been fed to them by incoming food gatherers. Their job is mainly transport, but they have to eat some of the food so that glands in their heads can produce the bee milk. Six days later, their effort is rewarded by a row of fat, shiny grubs curled in cells full of food. All this food has to be collected by the foragers, senior worker bees who've graduated from nursing to jobs in the wide world. Some of the foragers specialize in collecting pollen to mix with honey to feed the grubs. Theirs is a tiresome job. Because they can't unload at the entrance, they have to climb right into the hive with their legs encumbered with bulging pollen baskets. The pollen store is in a separate part of the comb. Having found a cell with room to spare, they drop their cargo. The pollen baskets are made up of bristles on the bee's legs. The bee brushes the pollen out and then threads it into the cell with a hind leg. No sooner has one bee finished unloading than another comes behind until the cell's full. These stores of pollen aren't only for the grubs to eat, the nurses have to eat some too. As the nurses grow older, they can no longer produce bee milk for the grubs. Instead, their wax glands start to make wax from the pollen they eat, and they become a very special kind of builder. Their job is to make lids on the cells of fully grown grubs so that they can pupate in peace. The pupa, or chrysalis, of a bee doesn't have a tough outer coat like a butterfly chrysalis. Instead, the cell lid provides the protection. For 12 days, the pupae lie behind a wax curtain while life goes on outside. And a bee's life does go on, 7 days a week. When a worker has nothing else to do, she cleans her colleagues, especially returning foragers, delicately picking flecks of dirt from awkward places the owner can't reach. The recipient of this attention spends her time in social activity, touching antennae and so sharing the hive scent. This is an important part of maintaining the unity of the hive. As the workers bustle about overhead, one wave of young bees is ready to hatch. A world of intense activity greets them when they finally chew their way out of their cells. A young bee is paler in color than its elders, with silky grey hair around its head and thorax. It's rather shaky on its legs at first, but as soon as it emerges, it's incorporated into full membership of the hive. The adult bees surround it and touch feelers, teaching it the hive's characteristic scent. Another passing worker gives it food, reinforcing the lesson. Each newcomer And there are about 1,000 a day takes her place in a complex society with a language to learn and rules to obey. As summer reaches its height, the honeybees work without ceasing. The new workers hatched every day replace the dead and enlarge the colony, and their cells must be cleaned to receive new eggs. The hive must be kept at the right temperature too, within a degree or two of 35 centigrade. With somewhere between 5,000 and 8,000 bees, in little more than 1/30th of a cubic metre, a great deal of heat is generated. When the temperature gets too high, some of the workers act as living fans, both inside and outside the hive, circulating the air with their wings. As the warm air is driven out from the hive entrance, it carries with it the hive's characteristic scent, and that helps forager bees to locate the hive on their way home. Not all insects can flap their wings if their feet are touching something, but bees have developed the knack for this special purpose. To make the cooling system more efficient on really hot days, some workers collect water to bring back to the hive. When it evaporates, it cools the hive even more quickly. But collecting water isn't without its dangers. Workers born in high summer live only about 3 weeks. 1 in 10 dies each day. In the last fortnight of its life, a worker bee reaches the peak of its career as a forager or food gatherer for the hive. To succeed, it must be able to speak bee language and to remember colours. These workers are feeding on a dish of sugar water on a blue background. Sucking up the food, which is even sweeter than nectar, they learn that today, blue means plenty. But take the dish away, drive off the bees, and shift the coloured squares about, and then what do they do? Within a minute, they are crowding onto the blue square again, although now there's no food there at all. They've remembered the colour. Even more surprising is the way bees converge on a good feeding place. For a long time, this was a mystery, until the Nobel Prize winner Professor Karl von Frisch in Germany proved that they tell each other where food is in a complicated and accurate dance language. Here, a scientist has put food near the hive. He marks the first few bees that find it. Back on the comb face, the marked bee begins to spin in the so-called circle dance. As the other bees crowd round, they get the message: food near the hive, look around outside. But when the feeding table is moved further away, in this case straight towards the sun, the bees' dance language changes. Again, the first arrivals are marked, this time with a blue spot, and followed back inside the hive. There they deliver their message in a dance shaped something like a figure of 8. This dance tells the other bees how far to go, how good the food is, and in which direction it lies. When the dividing line between the loops is vertical, the dance means straight towards the sun. But as the foragers set off towards the sun and the new food source, builders are busy elsewhere in the hive on a new and exciting project. It's a queen cell, and its construction marks the turning point of the bee's year. As the summer goes by and the bee population expands, the hive reaches a point at which some of the workers are redundant. There's plenty of food and more than enough labor to rear the dwindling number of new bees. Rather than stand idly by, the old queen and a body of experienced workers fill their bellies with honey and set off to find a new home. Those that are left behind set about rearing a new queen. The first job is to build a palatial new cell into which the departing queen will lay one last egg. About half the hive, 5,000 bees, set off with their old leader, perhaps to find a hollow tree, or more likely to be taken in by a beekeeper with his veil and gauntlets. The swarm settles on a nearby tree, which scout bees set off to prospect for new quarters. But back at the old hive, the new queen soon hatches, eagerly greeted by her subjects. As she emerges, the workers crowd round to groom her and to incorporate her scent with that of the hive. Among a forest of waving antennae, the hatchling queen is already taking charge of the hive. The queen's substance she produces will be the identity card of every worker under her rule, by which they'll know each other in the approaching weeks of conflict. After intensive grooming by the workers, the queen is ready for her wedding flight. While the bridesmaids fuss round the queen, the groom is ready elsewhere in the hive. The only male bees in the whole colony are a few hundred drones bred especially for this occasion. They're darker in colour and larger than the workers, and they make no contribution to the work of the hive, though they eat the honey stores readily enough. Just one of their number, by mating with the queen, will supply her with enough sperm for 4 years of egg-laying. The mating takes place out of sight, high in the summer sky. The queen returns the same day and begins laying eggs in the empty cells, her task for the rest of her life. An important duty for some workers as the season progresses is guarding the entrance to the hive. There are always a few raiders about, foreign bees from other hives, or wasps stealing honey and even killing the bees themselves for food. A bee's passport to enter the hive is the correct scent on her feelers. But after the mating flight of the new queen, the drones have served their only purpose in life. If they're expelled, they'll starve to death. This one is dying of stings from a worker in his own hive. With winter approaching, there's no room for passengers. The most feared of all raiders at this time are wasps. The guardians gang up on one wasp after another at the entrance, crowding round to immobilize each invader before a heroic bee finds the soft, vulnerable spot between thorax and abdomen to deliver the fatal sting. Wasps are suicide raiders. None of them will survive the winter anyway, but many bees die at this time, victims of wasp attacks. An alien bee is relatively easy to deal with, needing just 2 defenders for their hives. But a wasp actually feeding in the honey store requires the attention of a whole platoon of defenders. They have to dodge the darting sting until they can restrain the interloper and dispatch it. But the biggest honey thief of all goes unpunished, save for the occasional sting. The treasure hoard of the hive is taken away, but it's replaced by about 4 kilograms of sugar to keep the bees going through the winter. First, the wax capping is cut off the cells with a hot knife. Then the comb is spun in a centrifuge to extract the honey. A good hive makes 30 kilograms of honey in a season, thanks to the constant industry of its 10,000 workers. The weight of fruit produced by the flowers which the bees have pollinated runs into tons. As long as pesticides don't get out of hand, it's a happy example of one of nature's perfect partnerships. Flowers have lovely colors and contain sweet nectar for the bees. The bees fertilize the flowers while collecting their food. And because we enjoy the flowers and eat the fruit and the honey, we must protect and encourage the bees who make it all possible.
Unchanged since prehistoric times, the damselfly is tomorrow night's small miracle.